Hello everyone, and welcome to ChronCD, the monthly video show chronicling the history of CD console-based games, brought to you by Gaming History 101. I am your host, my name is Fred Rojas. Now I think before we get started, it's important to kind of iron out what ChronCD is. ChronCD's goal is to take a look at every single console-based CD game that came out, starting with the premiere of the PC Engine CD in 1988. As we go along, I will play every single game and kind of show it off. As you saw in the intro, it's going to be part quick look, part review, part retrospective. But don't expect me to spend too long on a game. I would guess roughly between 5 to 10 minutes max, and some of them can be much shorter when I take a look at a game. The point here is to give you an idea of what the game was and where it kind of fits in history, but not to go too in depth. If you would like depth, definitely check the links below, as I will often have a written review, a video review, or some further coverage of the games proper. Also keep in mind that this show is very Western-centric. Since I am born and raised in the United States, that is going to be the key focus, but that does not mean that I will not play games from other regions. In fact, on the contrary, you will often see Japanese games, and in rare occasions, Europe-only games featured on the show. I will literally be playing every single game that comes out for any CD-based console in chronological order. So as you could probably expect, for those of you who are a little more in the know of video game history, we're going to start off with the PC Engine CD, but it's not long before the Mega CD, otherwise known as the Sega CD, comes into play, and the two consoles run concurrently for a little while. Later on in time, around 1991, we see the introduction of the Philips CDI, which it was released in other regions, but it's predominantly an American-based console. So you will see these consoles run concurrently. There will be ways to identify where they're from, and it will definitely be mentioned as we see footage. Also keep in mind that release dates are how ChronCD is deciding when the games will show up. Basically, we get the most accurate release date we can. Often this will be the Japanese release, which was the first release, and feature the game in that chronological order. But also keep in mind that with the game systems like the Philips CDI and later in time the Panasonic 3DO, since these were mostly American focused, the release dates of games are very poorly documented and therefore highly scrutinized. It is under these circumstances that using research online, but that's not very useful because there's a lot of different sources that will say one thing or the other. And so predominantly print magazines, we're trying to pinpoint the exact day, and that's usually impossible, but more the exact month that a game comes out. However, you may have seen information or have documentation that says otherwise. In those rare instances, I do apologize. We do the best we can to be as accurate as possible, but of course, something's going to eventually slip between the cracks. Also keep in mind that there are certain CD-based consoles that we have chosen not to cover. One of those consoles would be the Neo Geo CD. Now the reason I've chosen not to cover the Neo Geo CD is pretty much because it is a bunch of Neo Geo games that were released in CD format purely for cost restrictions. Ultimately, once these games load, they run exactly like their console counterparts and/or arcade counterparts, and therefore I don't feel there's much analysis to be seen. So for that reason, I'm not going to right off the bat do the Neo Geo CD and a couple of other consoles like it. But keep in mind, we could always do side stories, we could always do side episodes and things like that. Starting out here, we are going to go with 10 games that basically made up the launch of the PC Engine CD, or the launch window, because it does start in 1988, but it bleeds heavily into 1989. From then on, we will continue forward, but you will notice that a lot of the games, especially in the beginning, are Japanese focused. Now, since I do not speak Japanese and do not understand Japanese, I do my best to fill in the gaps. Sometimes the games are completely playable without knowing Japanese. In other cases, sometimes there are scripts online, and in some cases, there is absolutely no guidance for me. I will do the best I can, but again, I stress that since this is a Western-focused TV series or video series, we're not going to go into the depth of translating them or playing them fully or even really giving them the appreciation they deserve, and for that I do apologize, but that would simply be too long and it would take us far too long to get through even the first episode, let alone future episodes where you'll see games that were actually released in your region. So for that reason, it's kind of just an overview. But what this series is trying to accomplish is when you look online, especially with a lot of Japanese or European focused consoles, but even here in America with consoles like the Philips CDI, which was barely considered a console by many people, you will notice that these consoles are very poorly documented, even by video game review sites and reviewers and things like that. And I think the reason was they were very expensive, restrictive hardware. So back in the days of the magazines, they didn't get any hardware to review these games. And then, in the rare event that they did, they'd even be less likely to get a publisher to give them a review copy. And sometimes stores in the area may not be stocking the games. So when you look online for a lot of games, you'll notice that there's like one sentence or one paragraph, and a lot of the times they watched a YouTube video or saw a brief cut of it and paraphrased kind of what they saw. So this intends to break down that barrier, actually play the game proper, and then see what we think. For that reason, you'll also see some quality differences, as I will be playing an emulated version of the games for anything that has a solid emulator. So like PC Engine and Sega Mega CD, like these have great emulators that capture a real high quality capture of the game while also running just as faithfully as the original hardware. I will also be playing the games outside of these emulators, though, just to make sure that they do play the exact same natively as they do in the emulator. I'm not going to take it for face value. But in that same vein, while there are emulators that exist, they're quite poor, and the compatibility is lackluster at best with consoles like the Philips CDI and the Panasonic 3DO. So what I'll do then is use a capture card using the S-Video Out, which is the most accurate and highest quality that these systems were capable of when they came out. Now, I must apologize, I don't have any external scaling hardware, such as the FrameMeister or various other things that lots of retro users like to use. I just don't have the funds for it, and this is going to be a free show to produce and a free show for everyone. But keep in mind, you could see some quality differences between the two purely because of the format in which I'm capturing them on. But again, since this show is not really comparing two versions against each other per se, like when we look at the 3DO version of, I don't know, let's say Primal Rage or Doom, you know, while there might have been versions on other consoles, those versions would be seen exclusively versus other counterparts. And not necessarily side-by-side comparisons comparing just those two console versions, especially because in many cases these games came out a year or so apart. So they wouldn't really fall in the same classification as one another because they are on a completely different or multiple different episodes that are much farther apart from one another. Hopefully that will be satisfactory to you. If not, this is kind of my project and I am making that decision, so there you go. But you will also notice that with this episode and a few others, when hardware is introduced, we kind of give an analysis of kind of the region at the time. You know, kind of show you what the gaming scape was looking like at that time, kind of what the hardware of the biggest players were, and then what this CD hardware hopes to introduce. So keep that in mind, and of course they are completely skippable. In addition, you will get time codes for when each game appears, when each section appears, so that you can have a better and more accurate idea as to when to see something specific. Finally, I'd like to close with the fact that while YouTube is a fantastic format, or rather vehicle to get this out to the audiences, it's embeddable on websites, it's streamed so you don't have to download, and it is available on like every device you've got. It does have some quality differences because of its massive compatibility. So while these games are all captured in 14 Mbps, YouTube will encrypt it, encode it. Sometimes there will be some loss of, actually in many cases there will be a heavy loss of quality down to usually about 6M for the 720p format, which most of these videos should appear in. So for that reason, I'm also uploading these on archive.org. Now those will be full 14 Mbps, high quality versions of these videos. However, they need to be downloaded and they will take up a large amount of space and a large amount of time, but you will get a much higher quality. Whenever we post a video on YouTube, it will also post on gaminghistory101.com as well as archive.org, and every single location will have links to every other location you can find it. So this should be a pretty easy way to find your way through and navigate it. In closing, I would also like to say a big thank you to Dr. Sparkle and the ChronTendo series and other series he has done for giving me a kickstart with a fantastic spreadsheet for the release dates of many games, as well as just kind of an idea as to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to scope this project. Also, keep in mind, though, he is not involved in this project, and while I may borrow some things from his format, I do not try to follow Dr. Sparkle's format. His is his own, and mine is my own. Anyway, with that, please enjoy the first episode of ChronCD by Gaming History 101. Thank you.